Welcome back to another episode of the Outdoor Adventures podcast here on Brownfield Ag News. I'm Brent Barnett. We have a special guest on the show this week. John Tate is joining us, who you may remember him from some Realtree Outdoors videos, the old Monster Bucks videos in years past. John, it's a pleasure to have you here on the show. How are you doing today?
Oh, man, thank you for having me. I'm good. Just blessed to be here and definitely, your email caught me off guard last week and didn't know anybody still follow the old Realtree days and obviously the part I played in it. But it's good to meet somebody that is a big fan of those Realtree and Monster Bucks days and definitely a big part of my life. So I enjoyed our conversation. It definitely brought back memories, I'm sure, for both of us. And they definitely, after we got off the phone, they came flooding back to me.
I'm so thankful that you took some time to join us here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while now, and I'm glad our schedules lined up. If anybody that has, watches hunting, online nowadays, whether it be on YouTube or Outdoor Channel, what have you, I'm sure along the way back, along the years here, they've watched the Realtree Monster Bucks DVDs, or, in my case, as a kid, it was the VHS tapes. And just knowing that you were a part of producing a lot of that content, that's so cool. And I'm excited to have you share your story with the listeners here and the viewers on our YouTube channel. So let's get to know John Tate first here. John, tell us more about yourself and your family.
So I grew up in Pumpkin Center, North Carolina, but if you're from there, you call it Pumpkin Center. You leave out the M and the P and you put an N in place. And, just my family was from Denver, North Carolina, on the west side of Lake Norman, and grew up here. All my grandparents were close by, my cousins, aunts, uncles, everybody. And so this was home. North Carolina was home, and did a lot of hunting when I was younger. My dad had bird dogs, so back then around here we actually had quail, wild birds, and my grandpa Sigmund and my dad, Mr. Tate, and my grandpa Tate he rabbit hunted, and so my dad had bird dogs. He loved to quail hunt, and so did my grandpa Sigmund, my mom's dad. And so as soon as I could keep up walking, I could go quail hunting with them. And so that was a lot of fun. I was a little boy. You want to be outside with your dad, with your friends, with your family. You just want to be a part of something, and didn't want to get left behind. And it was worth going through all the briar patches and skinning up your knees and everything else and ruining your pants to be a part of that group there. So I grew up and played football, baseball, basketball, this the old standard American deal, and rural America, and ended up going to Appalachian State University. And I was doing a lot of radio and TV stuff there at the university. It was really cool, a lot of fun to call those App State football games. And back then we weren't the App State that you saw beat Michigan, but we were still pretty dang good in the D1 AA conference. And Dexter Coakley played there when I was there. Matt Stevens, those guys went on to play in the NFL, and some other guys. But I actually was earning some credit hours one time when Marshall came to town, and Randy Moss was on the sidelines for Marshall. Well, he wasn't on the sideline unless he was getting a water break, but I was helping run cable back then. We didn't have wireless receivers on these cameras. You had, miles of cable. And so I was on the Marshall sidelines with a Sports South network. That, network don't even exist anymore. And I remember seeing Randy Moss, standing next to me. He's like string bean, 6'6", whatever he was. And he put on a clinic that day, man. He caught like 3 touchdowns, caught the pass, caught 2 or 3 balls over the middle that like three of App State defenders had the pursuit angle on him, and he had another gear, because I know all 3 of those guys that played on the defense side, they were friends of mine, and they could fly. And he just like, Phew. So I was earning credits that way, extra credit and things like that, and getting experience in the broadcast area, because I thought that's kind of what I wanted to do. And it just got to where I realized I wasn't a retired Joe Montana. I wasn't, Chris Berman, nobody like that. And so I got to thinking, what am I going to do? DJs at a country radio station, make 20 grand a year or something like that back then. And I enjoyed music, but I love to eat. I need to eat. So I was at a hunting camp one time with my cousin, and we were watching Monster Bucks 4. And that was pretty dang good video. That was like the first time we saw Michael Waddell on there bow hunting at the Perlitz Ranch. And of course, Bill David, Earnhardt, all these people were on that video.
Would that have been the video, John, where Greg Miller had the shot at the Iowa typical buck that was like a typical 12 frame?
That still gives me nightmares for Greg. He and I talked about that the first few times I was around him. I kind of got the courage up to ask him about it because, you just that's a heartbreaker. That buck he was a typical 12 with fishtail brow. So he was a typical 14. And yeah, that was brutal. That was the video that happened. And Greg, all I can do is smile about it. He says, "Hey man, at least I got to see him. I had that kind of opportunity at him." And what do you do? Back then he had, one of those TLR 75 type rangefinders, and I think he said he shot for 27 and the deer was 30, and those bows, 220 feet a second back then, it just went right under him and missed him. I mean, deer of a lifetime. I mean, well over typical 200-inch whitetail. Probably would have netted over 200 typical.
I still to this day can hear the voiceover of the person narrating the hunt.
Dan Chandler.
Is that who that was? I remember there was a deeper voice guy a little later on, a few years later, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Dan Chandler was the VO guy we used on all those. So anyway, so I just joking around with my cousin. I was like, man, I'm going to work for Realtree one day. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work for Realtree. And we giggled and laughed. And I didn't think nothing about it. I was just talking junk and hunting camp, chitter chatter, And so I'm at school, and they started talking about internships and things for the communications department. And it's like, you weren't required to do one, but the professors and everybody suggested you try to get one. Just, if nothing else, meet people, learn something different, whatever. So I got to think, I'm like, well, dang, maybe I could get into the hunting or fishing or just something outdoors. I didn't want to be stuck in an office, So I grew up in Denver, and right up the road from where my grandparents lived was Hank Parker's Outdoor Magazine's office. Big Hank. He lived on Lake Norman. Well, I went to high school with Hank Parker Jr., his brothers, Ben and Billy, Catfish, everybody calls him. And so I knew of Hank. I mean, he was on TV every other day, fishing on TNN back then, the TNN network. A lot of people don't know. I'll talk about that in a minute, but Hank's office was right there in my hometown. So I went, made a schedule, an appointment, went and met with him, sat down with him, super nice guy. And he's like, man, he said, I've got one camera guy. I've got all my production done in Dallas, Texas with 41 Entertainment. I don't really have a need for you. If you don't have any camera experience or anything. Back then you weren't filming, 10 social media videos a week. You had, 13 original episodes that you filmed catching a fish. And he had that down to a science, just like Bill Dance and all these other guys did. So we're sitting there talking, and I was just like, what do you think about Realtree? Is that something that I could go, try to talk to those guys? And he goes, man, that might be a good way for you to get into the business. Maybe run a camera, learn to edit something, PR something. So I went back to school. That was a Friday. I met with Hank, and I stayed at home that weekend and drove back up to Boone on Sunday. And going into town, there's the original Boone Walmart. And I pull in there, and I didn't know how I was going to get Realtree's information. There wasn't, the World Wide Web was in the infant stages. Folks had web pages, but they were just a screen of the logo and maybe some mission statement stuff or anything like that. Maybe a couple pictures, no videos, no nothing like it was now. So I pulled into the Walmart, and I went into the hunting section. And back then you had one way in and one way out. There was these magazine racks on either side of the entrance going in. I looked up and it just was right there in my face. It was a Realtree Monster Bucks magazine, and it had Bill on the cover with this big Canadian whitetail Bill had killed at Northway Outfitters. He was wearing that Realtree snow camo, some of the original stuff he ever did. And they were talking about Monster Bucks 5 coming out, whatever. So I grabbed the magazine and looked in it, and I was looking through it, and I was like, well, maybe there's a contact, mailing address, something. And on the inside cover, Realtree out or Jordan Outdoor, whatever limited, 1390 Box Circle, Columbus, Georgia, 31907. Still got that memorized to this day. And so Monday morning, I went to the computer lab. A bunch of you younger kids don't know what a computer lab is. You actually had to go somewhere on campus and schedule to use a PC or a Mac. You didn't have a laptop or your phone. You didn't have an iPhone back then. So typed up a cover letter explaining to Realtree, to whom it may concern, how I could benefit them and how they could benefit me from a internship, and literally put it in the mailbox in a manila envelope, kissed it, and said, you know what? All they can do is say no. I mailed it, went on to class, forgot about it, honestly. Well, that Friday, I drive back home, walk in the house, and my dad meets me at the door, and he said, hey, you just got a phone call from Realtree Outdoors. I'm like, what? He goes, yeah. He said, Steve Finch, this works at Realtree. He wants you to call him back. I'm like, holy smokes, And so got on the phone with Steve Finch. Steve was one of the most creative producers, camera guys I've ever been around. And he was one of the editors, the main editors and videographers that time at Realtree. This was 98. And so got on the phone with Steve. We talked for half hour, 45 minutes. I was excited. My dad was pacing back and forth up and down the hallway. And Steve got my letter. Actually, David had got my letter and give it to Steve to give me a call, David Blanton. And so I went, Steve said, hey, we want you to come down in about a month. We're going to be filming the segues, the little scenes we do for the Monster Buck videos for Monster Buck 6. Come down, meet the gang. We'll pay you, be a production assistant, a gopher, whatever. And I'm like, I didn't care. I was, okay, whatever. I went to the store and got donuts. I didn't care. So a month later, pull up, get to Columbus, Georgia, and the office that morning. And the first person I meet is David Blanton. And we shake hands, and he takes me up there and introduces me to Steve. And later that day, I met Bill and Michael, and did a lot of really cool learning that week as they were filming the Monster Buck segues. Learned a whole lot about production. It was bigger than anything I'd ever seen at the time. 3 big Digibeta cameras, lighting. Had a lighting crew come out of Atlanta to light the set. Audio guy with a grip, had a gaffer. All these terms I'd only read about in my production classes at school. I was actually seeing it firsthand being used, and I was a PA, production assistant. So I was basically in charge of getting stuff or labeling tapes. When they'd pop out a Digibeta tape, I'd write on the label and whatever. So went home excited, just happy to be a part of it. And then David calls me a few weeks later and says, hey, great to meet you. Really enjoyed having you. I know you wanted to be an intern over the summer. He said, but we don't really have anything for you to do. Would you consider learning to run a camera and go film some hunts for us this fall? Yeah. I was 21 years old, man. And I'm on the phone with him, on the phone with one of my deer hunting heroes. And I said, absolutely. So I worked my school schedule around it. And that August, I basically halfway lived between here and lived in my car and driving back and forth to Columbus, Georgia. But I became an intern video camera guy for Realtree in the fall of 1998.
That is so cool, John. So as you progress through that, then what was it like being on the road, traveling with those guys and filming some of those hunts? Because, I look back and I remember, my brother and I watching a lot of those tapes, and our dream was to always book a hunting trip to the Milk River.
Oh, yeah.
That was what was introduced to us from the Realtree videos. Never forget that, thinking, well, we have to go to Montana. Look at there's hundreds of deer on each of these hunts. And I'm just curious, what it was like traveling with those guys and any stories you want to share. Because I won't lie, you're unlocking a lot of core memories for me, and I hope that we're doing that with the rest of the audience too.
Well, I will probably I could probably run your computer battery down with the stories I could tell. I It was just a dream to even be there, and so uh, just to go see these places. My first trip ever was to I think Boulder Creek Outfitters up in Idaho with Tim Craig. So Bill went and hunted, and Terry Rom. I filmed Terry Rom from Tinks. Great guy. I couldn't have picked a better person to cut my teeth with my first hunt. Terry was a great guy. It was a bow hunt. It was 95 degrees hot as I'll get out, but the deer were moving, and just seeing that kind of country. I'd never really been out west. So, New Mexico elk hunting, I did that. That was like my second trip, and I filmed Ricky Joe Bishop kill an elk in a watering hole on the Floyd Lee Ranch. And that's when I realized just how big country that is. We were on that ranch outside of Grants, New Mexico, and we were riding around with the guide, and I said, and you can see forever. And I said, how big is this ranch? He said, it's 350,000 acres, cattle ranch. I said, holy smokes. I said, he said, see those mountains way over there? And there's like, little faint. He said, that's still on us. I'm like, holy smokes. So I immediately fell in love with that, being out west, just anywhere, the Southwest, the Northwest, the Midwest. It was all beautiful in its own right. And then, like you, I think my third trip was with Bill to the Milk River. And you're driving through the prairie country, and there's, a tree or two every 100 miles, it seems like. And we get up over that ridge where the river bottom is, and there's all the cottonwoods and the bright green alfalfa. And we climb into that big cottonwood that first afternoon, and Bill's kind of smiling, looking up at me, and got all my camera gear ready. And he said, "We good? Everything good?" I said, "Yeah, let's go." He goes, "I just cannot wait to see your face." And he said, it's unbelievable. You'll never experience anything else like this." And he was right. I mean, it's once one deer started, they all came by you. I mean, it's 150 deer in a 80-acre field. It just insane, the number of deer. And just to, after, like you, because I was a fan too of watching those videos of the Milk River and the cottonwood trees and just that whole vibe. And then now you're living it. I had to pinch myself.
That's so cool, John. So how did you see your roles progress then? I know you talked about running the camera, and then you and I, when we talked off the air, you mentioned you became a kind of a head producer, right?
Yeah. So, did a ton of video in the first couple of years, just really, really ask a lot of questions, screwed up a lot, learned a lot, got way better at telling a story with the lens, with the camera. And, I think that helped me become a better hunter too, in a lot of ways, because you have to be so much more prepared and ready and certain things with your movement and everything running a camera, especially those big, beta cams. So just got really good at that. And then we were using the Avid system at the time. And David said, "Hey man, start working on some of your hunts that you filmed to put on the Monster Bucks tapes." I said, "Okay, cool." So I started, just kind of going through the ringer and started editing and picked that up fairly well. And I had a few hiccups like anything else, and got to where I was churning out, 1.5 hunts a day on a good week for Monster Bucks. And at that time we were putting 35 to 40 hunts on both volumes. So we were having to crank them out a pretty good bit. And one thing led to another. And TNN went away. Viacom bought out the TNN network. And so Realtree Outdoors, just like Hank Parker's Outdoor Magazine and Hunting the Country and all these other TV shows, didn't have a home. And so at that time, the Outdoor Channel was in its very infant stages. And Bill he'd put a phone call into Tom Miranda, and he started looking at Realtree Outdoors switching over to ESPN2 for their weekend hunting and outdoor block. And so David said, "Hey man, you're going to take over producing Realtree Outdoors. Michael's busy with his new project, which we all know now was Realtree Road Trips, and which blasted him to a whole nother level. And so I grabbed the bull by the horns and started working on Realtree Outdoors on ESPN2, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, I remember watching some of those Realtree Outdoor segments over the weekend. I can't remember if it was Sunday morning where we were at or maybe Saturday morning, but yeah, and one of the first times I remember catching it on the guide on our TV, I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm going to click on that and see what this is all about. Yeah. And then I started seeing some of these hunts that I had seen on the Monster Bucks videos, but then realized, oh my goodness, they're rolling footage here I've never seen before, and showing like other days of the hunts that maybe didn't make the DVD or the VHS tape. So can you walk us through that a little bit and how you're able to expand on stories?
Yeah. So Realtree Outdoors, for the longest time was just an extension of Monster Bucks. It may have been a couple extra scenic shots, a hunting tip or a cooking tip or whatever, Realtree Pro Tip of the Week. But there wasn't a whole lot of story. It was just, hey, here's Michael, here's David, here's, Don Kiske, here's Ralph Ciancerulo. They're going to go shoot this deer, going to be hunting here. And so we met with the ESPN producers that work at the network, and they really challenged us. I mean, they almost, like we had confrontations about how we did things versus how they wanted things done. And at the end of the day, a lot of the stuff they said was right from a standpoint of storytelling. Not just because we would get to camp, get our camera gear ready. Whoever we were hunting with would go out and shoot their gun or shoot their bow. And if we were feeling froggy, we may film a little bit of it, but we didn't hit record till we got to the tree to climb up in the tree. And then when we climbed down out of the tree, we shut the camera off, went back to camp and hung out just like everybody else. So you missed a lot of travel, of camaraderie, of storytelling, of a home cooked meal or, something funny that happened. And so ESPN challenged, me and everyone else running the camera to do better. And we did, and we got better. And that's where, and I still I give ESPN some credit, but I think more of the credit is, at least in-house, goes to Steve Finch and Michael Waddell when they started filming road trips with that reality type stuff. And I can say it was true reality because Steve never stopped recording, ever. And Michael was he was very well aware of a good situation on how to bring the best out of someone he was in camp with or around at the time, or he always had a funny one-liner to say to the camera. So watching those guys and seeing what they were coming up with on every trip, was a perfect study guide for me and all the other freelance guys and the full-time camera guys to take it and run with it and try to create our own style. I mean, you've got Michael with his style, you had Bill and David and whoever else. And so, I got to where I would hit record and I could edit as I was filming in my mind. I'm like, all right, well, this is going to be this way, bam, bam, bam. And then you get into a rhythm of it and it becomes second nature, Can
you give the listeners an idea of just some of the people you got to meet over the years? Obviously, you mentioned, Bill, David, and Michael were stars, themselves, but the star power you guys brought in on some of the films with, I was a Braves fan growing up, Chipper Jones being on there, Ned Yost, who, me being from the Midwest and also following the Royals, Ned Yost was on there. Thinking of other guys, you mentioned Dale Earnhardt earlier. Just so many people that are well recognized had hunts on these videos back in the day.
And what was so cool about all those people, well, they were just like us, man. They were just deer hunters, outdoorsmen who loved to be in hunting camp, and they didn't want you putting them on a pedestal. They enjoyed putting that stardom or that recognition to the side. And like let's see. I was saying to my first year, I went to Idaho, New Mexico, then the Milk River. And I think my fourth trip that year was to the Timmons Ranch in Texas. And I was with Bill and David and Steve Finch. And then we pull up and there's Dale Earnhardt. And I grew up in North Carolina, 25 minutes from Mooresville, which is Race City, USA. I knew who Dale Earnhardt was even back then. And it, I mean, he was awesome. He was the intimidator. And so I was very nervous around him, obviously, because of who he was. It was actually the first, I guess, celebrity I'd been around. And I was trying to play it cool. But once he found out I was just from down the road where he grew up, he started picking at me. And he actually said, "Can you keep a secret?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, I got a farm over there in Mooresville." And I said, "Yes, sir, I've heard about it." And he said, I got some deer over there. I need to get footage of them. When you get home, will you come over there and film my deer for me?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." So I'd flew home, and David let me keep one of the big camera packages and drove over to Earnhardt Incorporated. And he meets me out front in his truck, and I follow him over past the chicken houses, past, where his house was, the bush shop, they called it, the deer head shop back then. And he dumped me off in one of his big shooting houses, which this was 98. So I can tell you that Dale Earnhardt's tree house, shooting house, deer hunting blinds back then would probably rival the real nice ones these days at Redneck and those other companies. He didn't do anything halfway. So I'd film these deer, make VHS copies for him to watch. And I was 21 years old hanging out with Dale Earnhardt. And I couldn't have, couldn't believe it, really. Just thought it was so cool, and definitely blessed to be a part of it. And then that same fall, I went to the Perlitz Ranch and filmed Chipper Jones kill a big deer down there with Jimmy Perlitz and those guys. And Chipper and I became really good buddies, and we're still good buddies to this day.
What a story, John.
Yeah.
I mean, just your path along the way here. I can't even imagine the conversations and memories you've been a part of. Eventually, I remember seeing you on camera, John. What were your hunting experiences like on some of the videos?
Well, before I want to go back to not just the celebrities that we met, but because they were all like, they just wanted to hunt with us, and we wanted to hunt with them because we were all friends. Like the hunting, whether you were the NASCAR driver or you were the all-star third baseman or you were Jeff Foxworthy, a big-time comedian, or whoever, Ned, everybody's common ground was the hunting and the outdoors. And when everyone was in camp, we were just friends. We weren't, asking for photos and signing autographs. We were just hunting buddies. And I always thought that was so cool that no matter what walk of life you're from, that everyone's grounded and loves that genuine, down to earth, just simple way of life. And I love that about all those guys. And not just those guys we met, but the ranchers, the farmers, the guides, the outfitters that would work really hard for us, and we would help them and work hard for them if we could. And there were so many people out there across this whole country that I met that just really, I love meeting people. I love people and talking to folks. And so it was really cool just to meet all these people that I never would have had the opportunity to otherwise. And like the Corman family that we used to stay with and hunt with, and then up in Montana on the Milk River, they're like my third set of grandparents. I still call them every Christmas and talk to them. So it's been pretty cool just to go where I've gone and meet who I've met, and to call a lot of those friends, and some of them extended family. So
that's so cool. Just those relationships you talked about along the way. I mean, you can't beat that, honestly.
No. But back to your, the next point about moving in front of the camera. David said, "Hey man, next year got this trip and that trip coming up. Would love for you to put in and draw a tag. If you can." And some of the places were over the counter, and so I got to bow hunt the Milk River. I got to hunt in Texas, in the Panhandle, in South Texas, and I went to Lee and Tiffany's in Iowa before they were Lee and Tiffany, and hunted with those guys. I was actually in their wedding, which is how old I am. But it was fun to do. It's weird. It is weird at seeing yourself on TV because everybody says, "I don't like how I talk. I don't know how I look," or whatever. So you kind of, I got a little embarrassed about it, but it was cool because my grandpa Sigmund he would watch the shows, and then he would call me and talk to me about all of it. And of course, my dad and my mom were super proud, and had some of their friends telling them they saw their son on TV. So it was pretty wild. It was pretty wild to get that opportunity and to be in some of those cool situations, to where it's like, here comes this buck, you got to make the shot, you got to do this and you got to do that. But I think what helped me, like I said earlier, I still got nervous. I still got buck fever. I still was excited, but holding a bow or a gun, was easy compared to running that camera for those early years and getting that emotional, roller coaster of adrenaline under control. Not to say I didn't miss, though. I did miss a few on camera.
I have to ask, if you had to think of 3 or 4 of your favorite hunts, maybe not hunts that you yourself were hunting or you filmed, or some that you've even watched back, are there any that stand out to you from the monster bucks days?
Yeah, I'm trying not to get emotional about a couple of them. Obviously the Iowa hunt that we did with Dale right before he got killed was pretty special, just to know that we got to spend some time together, before he got killed at Daytona. We filmed a guy named Mitch Enzer shoot an Osceola turkey in Florida to complete his Grand Slam. Steve Finch, myself, and David Blanton went with Mitch and his wife. Mitch had been diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and he shot this monster Osceola. And right then we all formed this bond with Mitch, and I became close. We all became close friends with him. And I remember him fighting that horrible disease for like almost 7 years. And so to have met him when I could still talk to him, he could talk back, and even toward the end when he couldn't, I knew what he meant, and I could kind of understand him. And that was just a blessing to hunt with him. And then we did some hunts with some kids that had life-threatening illnesses and things like that, and they have the best attitudes of anybody I've ever met. They're always smiling, they're always laughing, and I'm thinking, I'm sitting here complaining about high gas prices and how much my truck payment costs, and these kids have put up with more hardships than I've had, and I'm 25 years older than them, and that'll get you grounded really dang quick and put things back in perspective. So I liked all my hunts. I've been asked that same question so many times, and those are the ones that stick out. But if I really got to thinking about it, every one of them was special in their own way. Every location, every trip, every hunt, whether it was successful or not, I learned something, had fun, and it was just wonderful to be there.
John, what are you doing these days? Are you still helping out with Realtree at all, or what have you been up to?
No, I left Realtree in 2008 and had some other jobs, production type jobs for quite a while. And then this last year, the end of 2023, I actually hung up my hat from the hunting industry after 25 years, which really took me a minute to wrap my mind around. I got a job with Hayden Outdoors Real Estate, Hayden Outdoors. And they're a real estate company that is based out of Windsor, Colorado. Good people, great company. And 3 of my other hunting industry buddies, actually 4 now, Phil Phillips, Alan Treadwell from Bass Pro. He was on the Redhead team for a long time. Brandon Pendergrass, production guy that worked for Sub 7 for a long time. He did Lee and Tiffany's show. He worked with Craig Morgan on Craig's hunting show. Some of the Mossy Oak projects, he worked on some of those. And Jeff Lovin, who worked for Sub 7 and Lee and Tiffany a good bit. They all work for Hayden. And so they coerced me into kind of looking at the real estate side of things. And I'm thankful I did, man. So I'm working for Hayden. I'm a licensed real estate agent in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And I'm also working with their production department, producing some content for their YouTube channel. We produce property videos for over all of our 200 plus agents. So we have a pretty steady flow of work coming from that. And I'm selling real estate. So yeah, I've kind of got everything under one roof now instead of doing a bunch of freelance stuff. But I'm definitely enjoying it and still getting to do the production side of things, as well as this new venture of real estate, which I've been doing for the past 2.5 years.
No, that's really cool. Happy for you, John.
Thanks, man.
As we kind of wind down here, I had just a few follow-up questions just about the old shows. Just some fun stuff here. I remember when we were watching as kids there for a while, they did the 3D archery shoots in between segments, going away from like the in studio setup in the cabin by the fireplace or whatever, and then doing some 3D shooting throughout the video. So I have to ask, because we always had bets as a kid and our dad and everything. Who was the best shot? Was it Bill, Michael, or David? Who was the best 3D archery shooter back then?
Well, it all depended on the target, but hands down, Michael was the best. Now, Bill was pretty good too. Bill had his good days too. And don't let David fool you. David wasn't a slouch. But if I had to, if I was going to put an apple on my head and let one of those three guys shoot it off, it'd be Michael. I'd let him pull the William Tell off versus the other two guys, even though they're all good archers and good shots. Michael was hands down the best.
Something that always stood out, just a small detail. David was the first person I can remember seeing on film using a T-handle release aid. Yeah. As a kid growing up, you didn't really see that much. It was always the index style trigger release. And I didn't know, I was like, what the heck's he shooting with? Yeah. And of course, along the way, looking at some of the catalogs and stuff and figuring out what the equipment is, he was using a T-handle release.
He was. Bill had the caliper release. Michael had an old caliper release. And David, I can't remember if T-Bone turned David onto that or maybe Randy Ulmer, one of those guys I think David talked to and was using the thumb style deal. And actually, I shot a deer in Texas. David and I were filming each other on this trip, and he had a Stanislavski thumb release. And it's the best I've ever used. I still use one to this day. And I shot a deer with that thing. I'm thinking, holy smokes, David, this thing is awesome. He goes, that's awesome. Heck, it is awesome, And so, yeah, I mean, David, he told me, he said, it just makes me a better shot. I can touch that thumb. It kind of startles me when the shot goes off and I'm way more accurate. And he said, you need to try it because it'll help make you a better shooter.
You mentioned T-Bone. I have to bring him up because along the way, he got introduced during those 3D segments and he was shooting, golly, this
a bear whitetail.
Yeah, it had like a fishing pole attached to it on the end of it. And he had Jeff Foxworthy next to him.
Yeah, it was T-Bone and Willie, because we did the Willie and Billy Incomplete Deer Hunter comedy videos with Jeff and Shane Caldwell. And then T-Bone got brought around and he had that big old long billed hat and he'd cut the notch out where he could draw his bow. And it was a bear whitetail or whitetail 2, had the metal cables on it with the string. And he was shooting a Carter back tension release, and that bow was literally shooting maybe 200 feet a second. Way caveman technology compared to what Michael and David and Bill were shooting. And T-Bone would outshoot them lights out with that old gear, which goes to prove that all this new fancy stuff, if you get the old stuff dialed in, you're just as accurate, But yeah, that was pretty impressive. And T-Bone, he could shoot a gnat at 100 yards with a bow. It was unbelievable watching that guy. And he made me a way better shooter. All of us who took time to work with him, he would watch your form and this, that, and the other. And he could see 10 things that I did before I even got settled into my anchor point wrong. So once he got, all the kinks worked out of me and everyone else, we all shot better.
Was he a competition target shooter? Is that what he did?
He was the 91. I think he was the 91 world champ.
Wow.
Archery. I think ASA 91 world champ. Yeah, sure was. And then he owned a bow shop there in Hogansville, Georgia. And we all met him. And then he opened up he worked for another store down in the Grange, Georgia, for a long time, and had an archery shop inside that big store there, hunting store. And it was 2 miles from my house at that time, so I'd go up there and hang out with him and shoot a bunch, and worked all the kinks out. But he was just a good friend, and just like all of them were. I mean, I kind of like to say we all kind of grew up in the hunting industry together in that golden era of, from the late 90s till, 2010 roughly, when it was before it got all, social media content became king, and the TV shows and those monster books, VHS tapes that transitioned to DVDs, they all went away.
As you look back, John, what did it mean to you to be a part of that?
Those guys give me an opportunity, Bill, David, all of them give me an opportunity, as a young kid out of college, had no experience running a camera other than a little bit in the classroom. But I think they saw that I was willing to work hard. And when I did screw up, I never made the same mistake twice. And just blessed, man, to have that opportunity. But I also knew I was raised enough and smart enough to know and reminded quite a bit from my family that, like, you got a pretty good deal in front of you. You need to do everything you can to capitalize on it. And so I worked hard and kept learning and kept evolving, and have met so many wonderful people. And, it's just been a blessing to be in this industry. And I still consider myself a hunting industry person, one of the OGs, I guess. But it's, people like Steve Finch that helped me get creative with a camera, and people like David, who, was the guy I worked under and learned a lot from. And of course, hunting with Bill, I learned a lot about Bill and business. And, then Michael he was just a hunting machine. I learned a lot about how to, hunting from Michael that I'd never been exposed to. And all the guys, I mean, there was anybody that you ever saw on a Monster Bucks tape, DVD, the hunting show, and then some. Every one of those people I had interactions with and were friends with. And it's a lot of people, but actually it's a pretty tight-knit, small family group when you think about it.
And also, when you think about it, a lot of those people, John, we still see to this day, still sure in front of the camera. That's really cool.
Well, you see Tyler Jordan. I filmed Tyler kill his first turkey in Georgia, and now Tyler's, front and center with the company. And Michael's obviously the bone collector himself. Lee and Tiffany have the crush. David and Bill are still getting after it. You got, oh man, I mean, Chipper's retired. He was a Hall of Famer. I went to the Hall of Fame induction in Cooperstown when he got inducted into Hall of Fame. And
oh, wow.
We, all these people, I still talk to the Cormans, like I said, every year out in Montana. And, it's pretty wild. And then I get an email from someone like you who, like me, was a fan. And it's just good to go back into these memories and these stories, because, honestly, if you don't visit them, continually, whether you write them down or think about them or watch them on TV, you're going to forget them. And the older I get, the more I have a need to write these things down. And so I'm probably going to start keeping a journal on some of this stuff. And I was going through some of my old boxes a while back, throwing some stuff away, and I came across 3 or 4 different calendar books, that you can get, the planners. And I found the first 2 or 3 hunting schedules that David would put out in August every year. And they was on like 3 or 4 pages. And it had, it was like a spreadsheet. So it had hunters on one page or one column, the location, who was running camera, what camera package you were going to use. And so all those names were on there: Bill, David, Michael, Bill Winkie, Dale Earnhardt, Chipper Jones, Jeff Foxworthy, Dan Massimio from Bear Archery, all these people. It just looking at that piece of paper brought back so many memories of those trips.
I keep giving you the classic Midwestern goodbye here, where I keep asking questions because more thoughts come into my head. So I apologize about that.
We can do a part 2, man. It's all good. We can do a part 2 and keep going.
my very last question, just from a production side of things, I have to ask about the instrumental music beds that we would always hear in those classic films, whether it's the montage theme from like Monster Bucks 2, or what you hear during the hunts, because those stuck with me for so long, John, that to this day, when I'm bow hunting, that if I'm in the woods by myself and there's a deer coming in, I promise you, some of those come into my head while I'm in the hunt.
Yeah. Yeah. Music is very powerful. And I didn't realize it at the time. You think visually, you're watching a show or a movie. I mean, think about watching the movie Jaws without the music. Think about watching Star Wars without that music. Think about anything. So it's the same with these hunting videos and these shows. Is you've got to pick that right music. And for a while, those music beds were iconic because Realtree had the best videos out. They had the best footage, and we used those music beds for quite a while because they were almost as signature of a sound as the logo was, or the name, or the voiceover of Dan Chandler. All that stuff worked together in unity to help make those videos the best they could be, and that's why they were the most popular of all time.
John, how can people stay connected with you today? You mentioned Hayden Outdoors. Do you have a website that you're on?
Yeah, it's haydenoutdoors.com. There's a tab there to check on the states, and there actually another tab is called Meet the Team. You can scroll down through there and find me down there. And I can't even think of what my Instagram information is. I'm on Instagram too. Let's see here if I can tell you what it is. It's John Tate _ Hayden Outdoors. That's my Instagram handle, and I'm on Facebook as well. I don't really get on Facebook much or Instagram much, other than just to put up, property videos and things like that, promoting my real estate stuff. But I still keep up with friends that way, and everything is way different than sending someone a letter or giving a phone call. It's all different now. You can keep up with somebody without ever talking to them. I kind of miss those old days.
Yeah. Well, hey, I can't thank you enough, John, for taking some time to join us here. Really appreciate kind of the throwback here, going into some memories, like you said, and just an honor to be able to talk to you. Thank you, sir. Nice to meet you here.
You too, Brett. Thank you for everything, and I appreciate the time and the walk down memory lane. Thank you very much.
Again, that's John Tate, and thanks so much for watching here on our latest Outdoor Adventures episode. You can always find our episodes at the Brownfield Ag News YouTube channel. I'm Brent Barnett on Brownfield. Thanks a lot for watching the show this week.